The rain came sideways across the flight line at Camp Vetter, and Dana Mercer stood at the edge of the maintenance apron in it, not moving, while the two crew chiefs behind her argued about whether the ceiling would lift by dawn. She had her flight helmet under one arm and her other hand flat against the fuselage of the Black Hawk like she was reading its pulse through the aluminum. Water ran off the rotor blades in long threads. She wasn't looking at the weather. She was looking at the ridgeline to the east, where the clouds sat down on the rock like something tired, and she was doing the arithmetic nobody had asked her to do yet. "She's never seen combat," one of the chiefs said, not quietly enough. "Read her file, ferry flights, training hours. She's a bus driver with a good haircut." Dana didn't turn around. She flexed her fingers once against the skin of the aircraft and let them rest again. There was a thing she knew about that ridge that none of them knew because she had flown it in daylight 3 days ago on a milk run and watched how the wind came off the saddle and folded, how it lied to you about which way it was moving until you were already committed. She filed that the way she filed everything, without comment. In about 30 hours, she was going to take this machine into that fold in the dark with the doors open and no lights, and she was going to do it because there wasn't going to be anyone else. And none of the men laughing behind her had any idea. "Bus driver," the second chief agreed. She put her helmet on the seat and walked back toward the hangar through the rain, unhurried, boots even on the wet concrete. The forward-leaning things she said to the aircraft and not to them, low, almost fond. "We'll see what you've got left. If you're the kind of person who stays to the end of a thing, stay to the end of this one. And wherever you're listening from tonight, Chicago, Phoenix, a parking lot in Halifax, hit the button that keeps these coming. Because somewhere past the middle of this, a man who called her a bus driver is going to be on a radio in the dark, out of options, saying her name like a prayer, and you're going to want to have been there from the start when nobody thought she could fly." The hangar at Vetter smelled like hot metal and old coffee and the particular mildew that gets into canvas in a wet season and never fully leaves. It was a converted agricultural building, high steel ribs overhead, a dirt and gravel country beyond the doors that turned to soup when it rained and to bone-colored dust when it didn't. Dana had grown up in country not unlike it, high and dry most of the year, and she had learned to fly the way some people learn to swim, which is to say, before she had language for what she was doing. Her grandfather Cyrus had a crop dusting outfit outside a town too small to name, 2 aircraft held together with judgment and safety wire, and he had put her in the right seat when her feet couldn't reach the pedals and let her feel the controls under his hands. He flew low. That was the whole business, flying low. 10 feet off a field with a load of chemical and a line of power lines coming up and a stand of cottonwoods at the end you had to pull over and drop behind again. He never raised his voice in an aircraft. He raised it plenty on the ground. But in the air he got quiet. And the one thing he said to her, over and over, across years, until it was carved into her the way a riverbed is carved, was this: "The air's got a shape. It ain't flat and it ain't empty. You learn the shape of a piece of air, and you can put a plane through a keyhole. You fight the shape, it'll kill you, and won't even work up a sweat." She was 14 the day she felt it for the first time on her own, the shape. He'd let her take the Piper down a draw between 2 low hills, with a crosswind coming over the west rise, and she'd felt the air stack up and slide, felt the lift bunch on one side and thin on the other. And instead of fighting it, she'd lean the aircraft into the fold and let it carry her through the low point like a leaf going down a gutter. Cyrus hadn't said anything for a long moment. Then, "There, that. You felt that." Not a question. She had felt it. She never stopped feeling it after that. The Army had eventually noticed she could fly, the way the Army notices things, slowly and by accident, and it had trained her and stamped her and put her on ferry flights and training rotations because her paperwork was clean and unspectacular, and nobody read past the first line, which said augmentee, aviation, support. Nobody read down to the crop duster's granddaughter who could feel the shape of a piece of air in the dark. There was a call she owed and hadn't made. Not to Cyrus. Cyrus was fine. Cyrus was 81 and ornery and would outlive them all, cussing at a carburetor in a shed that smelled of avgas. This was different. 2 years back, there had been a pilot named Wes Kettner in her training cohort, a big, easy Kansan who had washed out on a check ride that Dana had passed, and afterward, raw and stupid with relief, she had said something to him in front of other people that she should not have said, something about how some people just don't have the hands for it. She'd seen it land on his face. He'd laughed it off and shaken her hand and gone home to Kansas, and she had told herself she'd call and take it back, and 2 years had gone by and she never had. He wasn't hard to reach. She had his number in her phone. That was the thing about it that ate at her, that it would take 4 minutes and she just kept not doing it. The debt sat there. The operation ahead of her would not touch it. Nothing out here would. The days before it broke had their own weather. There was a warrant officer named Hollis Grady who ran the maintenance section, 50-odd, 20 years in, hands like tree roots, who had watched Dana pre-flight an aircraft on her second morning at Valor and gone quiet in a way his men noticed. She'd walked the bird the way you walk a horse you don't trust yet, and she'd caught a chafed hydraulic line that 2 inspections had missed, not by looking for it, but by running her palm along a place her palm had no business already knowing to check. Grady hadn't said much. He'd just started giving her the good aircraft. The man who hadn't gone quiet was a pilot named Rourke. Loud, gifted, genuinely good in a cockpit and completely certain of it, the kind who filled a room and knew he filled it. He'd flown 3 tours, and he wore them. The first time Dana's name came up on the flight schedule for anything that mattered, Rourke laughed out loud in the ready room where 11 people could hear. We're putting the ferry pilot on the night stack now? He shook his head, grinning, working the crowd. Somebody's gonna have to fly formation on her just to make sure she finds the LZ. She flies like she's afraid of the aircraft. Somebody laughed. Dana was 3 feet away, tightening a strap on her kit. She didn't look up. She had learned a long time ago that the shape of a room, like the shape of a piece of air, could not be fought head-on, only understood and used. She let it sit. But there was a night, 2 before it all came apart, when the rain had stopped and the mess had run out of everything but powdered eggs, and the pilots sat around a folding table telling lies, and Dana was funny. She could be. She did an impression of a supply sergeant they all hated that had Grady wiping his eyes, and she told a story about Cyrus dusting a field and coming home with a scarecrow's hat snagged on the landing gear that nobody believed and everybody loved, and for an hour she was just one of them, easy and quick, and even Rourke laughed once before he remembered he wasn't supposed to like her. When the laughing died down, she caught the eye of a young medic across the table, a kid named Petra Voss, and Petra was looking at her the way you look at a card trick you can't figure out. Later, Petra would matter. Just then, she was only a girl who couldn't have told you what she'd seen, except that when Dana laughed, she didn't stop watching the door, and the watching didn't look like fear, it looked like arithmetic. It broke at 21:40 on a Thursday, and it didn't come as a radio call in the dark. It came as a runner, a comms specialist named Toller, sprinting across the wet apron with his boots throwing up water into the hangar where Dana was helping Grady chase a fuel flow gremlin with a flashlight in her teeth. "They want everybody," Toller got out, chest heaving. "Chalk elements down, east of the saddle, the one out past the ridge." Grady straightened up slow. Dana took the flashlight out of her mouth. A reconnaissance element, 12 men, had gone into the high ground east of the ridge 2 nights before to sit on a road and count trucks, and something had gone wrong on the road, and now they were pinned in a dry draw with the walls closing in around them and the weather sitting on the only way out. 12 had gone in. There were still 12 alive for now, which was the number, and the number was going to be said out loud in that room more times than anyone wanted to hear it before the night was done. 12. They needed to come home, 12. The ceiling was 400 feet and falling, and the ridge stood at 6. They gathered in the operations tent under the bad light, and the man who ran it all, a lieutenant colonel named Errol Banks, stood at the map with the muscle in his jaw working. Banks had signed off weeks ago on the roster that buried Dana in the ferry pool. Banks had read the first line of her file and moved on, like everyone. Now he looked at the ceiling number and the ridge number and the fuel math, and he looked at the pilots in the tent, and there was a thing on his face that a proud man hates to wear in public. I need somebody who can fly the saddle at night, under the ceiling, with the doors open, Banks said. Nobody moved. Rourke, for once, was studying the map and not talking. Under it, not over. There's no over tonight. His eyes went around the tent and stopped on Dana and stayed, and everyone saw it stop. Mercer, Banks said. And then, because he was the kind of man who could at least do this much, he said it in front of all of them. I put you where I put you because I didn't read past the top of your file. That was my mistake, and it's yours to make me pay for. You've flown that ground in the day. Can you fly it now? Dana pulled the map toward her and looked at the ridge and the saddle and the fold of air she already knew was waiting in that low point, and she felt the old thing settle over her. The quiet. I can fly it, she said. She keyed up 90 seconds later, walking to the aircraft, and the voice that came out of her on the radio was not the voice of a bus driver or a ferry pilot or a woman who flew like she was afraid. It was flat and level, and stripped of everything that wasn't information. Vetter, Mercer. Lifting in 6 with fuel for the saddle and back, plus 20 minutes on the deck. I'll need a talk-on to their position, and I'll need everyone off this frequency who doesn't have to be on it. A pause. And somebody get me the exact grid where they last had a sound from the recon element. Exact. Grady, listening in the tent, looked at Banks and said nothing, but his eyebrows did the talking. She lifted at 21:58 into a sky the color of a closed eye, and the moment the wheels left the mud, the weather had her. Rain drove flat across the windscreen. The world outside the cockpit was a smear of black on black with the vaguest paler black where the horizon should be, and Dana flew it on instruments and on the seat of her body both, feeling the aircraft the way Cyrus had taught her to feel it, reading the air's intentions half a second before the instruments caught up. Her crew chief tonight was a lean, quiet man named Diego Salt on the door gun, and in the back she carried Petra Voss, the young medic, because whoever came out of that draw was going to be hurt and someone had to keep them alive on the way home. Ceiling's dropping, Salt said over the intercom, not panicked, just true. 380. I see it. She had the ridge on the nose now, a mass of deeper dark rising into the murk, and the road east of it where the recon element had gone to grief. She came down. That was the first thing that made no sense to anybody watching the plot back at Vetter, the altitude readout going down as she approached rising ground, but Dana came down because Cyrus had taught her that you get under bad air the way you get under a wave. You don't ride the top of it where it's confused. You get down into the smooth where it's decided what it's doing. At 400 feet, a downdraft coming off the ridge shoulder tried to put her into the rock, and she felt it start half a second early, felt the lift go soft on the left before the aircraft had fully committed, and she rolled into it instead of away, let the mountain's own tumbling air catch the low side and carry her along the contour like water finding the groove of a gutter. The rotor tips could not have been 40 feet off the stone. Salt made a sound. She didn't. Mercer. Vetter, Banks in her ear, tight. You're right in the terrain. Confirm your, I'm where I mean to be. Ahead, low. She caught the pinprick of an infrared strobe, one of the recon element marking themselves, a firefly in a well. I have their marker, coming in from the north downhill into the wind. She keyed to the ground element's frequency. Ground element. Aircraft is 1 minute out. North side, tell me your situation. Tell me your numbers. She wanted the number from them, in their own voices, so she'd know how many she was fighting for. The voice that came back was ragged and young and running under fire. Small arms crackled behind it. Aircraft, we got 12. We still got 12. But we got wounded, and we got bad guys on the high ground east. They're up above us, shooting down into the draw. We can't get up the walls with them up there. Gunfire swallowed it. 12. Still 12. And a problem she had not been briefed on, because nobody had known it. The men couldn't get out of the draw, not only because the aircraft couldn't reach the bottom of it, but because a machine gun position had set up on the eastern lip and was raking the one path up the wall, the only path wide enough to move wounded, and as long as that gun lived, nobody was climbing anywhere. This was past flying. This was a problem she was going to have to solve with the aircraft itself, and she had about 2 minutes to see it. She flared hard over the mouth of the draw and held the Black Hawk in a low hover with the doors open. rain and rotor wash howling into the cabin, and looked down into the slot of darkness where 12 men were pinned. The draw was too narrow and too steep to land in. The gun on the eastern lip was a stuttering orange tongue in the dark, and every few seconds it walked its fire down the escape path, and the men down there flattened themselves against nothing. "I can't put down in that," she said, mostly to herself, "and I can't lift them off the bottom with that gun up there. It'll cut the hoist line and everybody on it. So what do we do?" Salt's voice, level, trusting her, waiting. And here was where the shape of the air, the thing Cyrus had spent a lifetime carving into her, became the only thing that could save 12 men. Because Dana was looking at the eastern lip where the gun was, and at the way the ridge stood behind it, and at the weather sitting on the saddle, and she was doing the arithmetic she had started days ago in the rain on the apron. She keyed the radio to reach one man, Grady, back at Vetter, because Grady was the only one who'd understand the airframe question fast enough. "Grady, Mercer, I need a number, and I need it now. Downwash. This aircraft, this weight, in a low hover, how far does the rotor wash reach out laterally at, say, 60 feet? How wide's the cone of it, the real punch of it, before it dies out?" A pause. Then Grady, understanding nothing yet but answering the question. "In still air, 15, 20 feet of real force off the disc edge before it quits. Why? It's not still air. There's a wind coming over that saddle behind the gun position, west to east, and it folds when it comes off the high ground. I flew it in the day. I know where it folds. It comes off the ridge, and it drops, and it slides east right across that lip where the gun is." She was already repositioning as she talked, walking the aircraft up and to the side, gaining a little height, sliding west and above the machine gun position where it sat on the eastern lip, firing down into the draw. "If I put this rotor disc up here, above and west of that gun, and I stand the aircraft on its wash right at the top of that fold, my downwash doesn't die out in 20 feet. Grady, it rides the wind that's already going that way. The two of them stack. The wind carries my wash out past where it should ever reach and drops the whole weight of it straight down onto that lip." Silence on the frequency. Salt, quietly. "You're going to blow them off the mountain with the wind and the rotor. I'm going to fold my wash into a wind that's already folding and drop a wall of air on a machine gun." She said it slow because she needed Salt to do his part exactly right, and she needed the men below to be ready. "It's the same trick my granddad used to lay a chemical line down flat in a crosswind instead of letting it drift. You don't fight the wind that's there. You put your own push on top of it and let the two of them go the same direction and hit 10 times as hard as either one alone. Ground element, listen to me. In 30 seconds you are going to feel a hurricane come down on that eastern lip. It is mine. When it hits and that gun goes quiet, you move your wounded up the path, and you move them fast, because it will not last long. Aircraft, say again you're gonna... 30 seconds. Get ready to climb. Now the weight." She brought the Black Hawk up and west, into the very edge of the wind coming off the saddle, into the fold she had memorized in daylight 3 days before, and she felt the air stack up under the disc exactly the way it had stacked up in the draw between two hills when she was 14 and Cyrus had gone quiet in the right seat. She held it. The aircraft shuddered on the seam of the wind. Rain sheeted sideways through the open doors. She could see the gun below and east, still firing, its crew with no idea what was gathering above and behind them in the dark. She eased the collective and let the disc bite down into the top of that moving air, and for a long second, nothing happened. Nothing at all, the way nothing happens in the moment after you've done the thing and before the thing arrives, and Salt started to say something, and then it arrived. The stacked air went down the fold like water over a spillway and hit the eastern lip with the combined weight of the storm's own wind and the full downward punch of the rotor and the machine gun position, the crew, the gun on its mount, the loose belts, the dust and grit of the lip itself was picked up and thrown off the mountain into the draw's far dark like a hand had swept a table. The orange tongue snuffed out. The firing stopped. "Guns down," Salt said, hushed. "The guns down. They're moving. Look at 'em go." Dana was already sliding the aircraft back and around, back to the mouth of the draw, dropping the hoist. Below, in the sudden absence of that gun, 12 men were pouring up the path with their wounded between them, up out of the slot, into the wider ground where she could reach them. The count came up over the next 11 minutes, one at a time, and Dana said each number back to keep them all honest. The first 3 came up walking. The 4th and 5th came up on the hoist, a wounded man strapped to another man's chest, and Petra Voss hauled them into the cabin and went to work with her hands in the dark and the wind. "That's 5, Dana said. "I need 12. The saved man was the 8th one up, and his name was Cole Ferris, and he came into the cabin white and shaking with a field dressing gone dark at his thigh, and Petra pinned him and worked, and Cole grabbed the front of Dana's harness where he could reach it from the floor and looked up at her with the specific terror of a man who has been doing math about himself. "Am I gonna make it?" he said. Not a question, really, a thing he needed weighed by someone who wouldn't lie to be kind. Dana looked at Petra. Petra gave her the smallest nod. Dana looked back down at Cole Ferris and gave him a fact, because a fact was the only thing worth giving. "The bleeding's stopped and we're 40 minutes from a surgeon who's already scrubbed. You're going to make it. What have you got waiting on you at home, Ferris? Give me something to fly toward." He laughed, wet and ragged. "My wife, Marta. We bought a house we haven't even slept in yet. Closed on it the week I shipped. Whole thing's empty. We were gonna—" He lost it for a second. Found it. "First night in it. We've been saving up the first night." "Then that's where we're going," Dana said. And it wasn't a hope, it was a heading. Her hands, which had just held a hurricane over a machine gun, came off the collective for 3 seconds to steady the strap across his chest with a gentleness that surprised even her, tightening it a careful notch so the ride wouldn't tear the wound, before she put them back on the controls. 12. I need 12, Salt. Where are we? That's 11 up. One more on the line. The 12th man came up, and Diego Salt hauled him in and said the word she'd been flying toward all night. 12. That's 12, Mercer. We got 'em all. There was one more thing to do with the aircraft before she could turn for home, and it was the thing that cost her, because it was not the wild ride into the terrain, and it was not the trick with the wind. Coming out of the draw, fully loaded, 12 men and her crew, and their weight and the fuel. In that ceiling, with the ridge still standing between her and Vetter, she did not have the power margin to climb over. She never had. The whole plan had always required going back through the saddle, through the same fold of air, but now heavy, and heavy changed everything about how the fold would hold her. She held the position at the mouth of the draw an extra 90 seconds, exposed, a fat, slow target in a hover while the men on the high ground she hadn't dealt with found their range, and she held it because she needed the wind to gust the right way before she committed a full aircraft to that seam. And if she went early and the fold wasn't there, she'd fly 12 rescued men into a wall of rock. Rounds came up at her out of the dark. She heard 2 of them go through the tail somewhere with a flat slap. Salt was returning fire past her shoulder. She sat in it, counting the wind, feeling for the shape, until the gust came the way she needed it, and she rolled the heavy aircraft into the fold and let the mountain carry them all through the low place and out the west side into the open dark, and the rock went by close enough to touch, and then it was behind them. "Vetter, Mercer," she said, and her voice had not changed at all. It was still flat, still stripped, still only information. "Coming home with 12. 2 urgent surgical, the rest walking wounded. Tell your surgeon he's already scrubbed. Request you clear the pad." That was all. She flew them home through the rain. In the tent at Vetter they had heard most of it, the Freck alive with the count coming up. And when she said coming home with 12, there was a sound in that tent that nobody there ever quite described afterward. A kind of collective exhale that had a noise in it. Banks put both hands flat on the map table and leaned on them and closed his eyes. Grady, who had given her the number that let her do it and understood better than anyone in the room what she had actually done with it, sat down slowly on an ammo can and stared at nothing. Rourke was in the tent, too. Rourke had been on the frequency the whole time, silent, listening to the ferry pilot fly a fully loaded Black Hawk through a saddle at night under a 400-foot ceiling, listening to her drop a wall of air on a machine gun with a crop duster's trick, listening to her come home 12 for 12. When the transmission ended, Rourke opened his mouth like he was going to say something, some version of the thing he always said, and nothing came out. He shut it again. He had nothing. For the first time in 3 tours, Rourke had nothing at all to say, and he stood there in the bad light holding it. She set the aircraft down on the pad at 2312, and the surgeon and his team ran out under the still-turning rotors, and the wounded went off into the light, and Cole Ferris went by on a litter and got one hand up off the litter toward the cockpit as he passed, not a wave, just a hand held up, and Dana touched 2 fingers to the brim of her helmet without looking like she'd done anything at all. Then the pad was empty, and the aircraft was cooling and ticking, and she was still sitting in the seat with her hands in her lap, and that was when they finally started to shake, not before. Her hands had been steady through the fold and the gun and the 90 seconds of hanging in the rounds, dead steady, and now that there was nothing left to fly, they shook like a struck bell, and she let them, sitting alone in the cockpit in the dark. And outside the rain came down on the rotor blades in long threads the way it had that first night on the apron. "That's 12, she said to nobody, to the aircraft quietly. "You had it in you. The paperwork of a thing like that has a life of its own, and 2 days later it walked into the tent in the person of a review officer named Lieutenant Colonel Prentice, sent up from a headquarters that could not make the record match the file. Prentice was a careful man with a careful haircut and a folder, and he sat Dana down across a field table and opened the folder like a man laying out evidence. "Warrant Officer Mercer," he tapped the top page. "Your record, ferry flights, training rotations, aviation augmentee, no combat time, no high-altitude terrain qualification on file, no night terrain currency past the minimum." He turned a page. "And then this operation. A loaded night terrain flight under a 400-foot ceiling, a hover maneuver at the disk clearance limit, and AE." He looked at the page like it had insulted him. "A claim, corroborated by everyone on the net, that you neutralized a crew-served weapon position using rotor downwash and terrain wind." He set the folder down. "I have flown for 19 years, and I have never heard of that being done. Help me understand how a ferry pilot did a thing I couldn't do." Dana didn't reach for the folder. "You've got the wrong first line, sir. You're reading augmentee and stopping." "Then give me the right first line. Cyrus Mercer," she said it plain. "Crop duster. 40 years low-level agricultural flying in high, gusty terrain. He put me in the right seat before I could reach the pedals, and he taught me that air has a shape, and you fly the shape or it kills you. The maneuver over the gun isn't in any manual, because it isn't a military maneuver. It's how you lay a spray line flat in a crosswind. You put your own downwash on top of a wind that's already moving where you want it, and the 2 stack. I've done it 1,000 times over a bean field. I did it once over a machine gun." She held his eye. "The record you've got measures whether I have the qualifications. It doesn't measure whether I can fly. Those aren't the same test. And you know they aren't, because you've flown 19 years and you've met the difference." Prentice looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his folder and slowly closed it, and the closing of it was an admission. "No," he said, "they're not the same test." He stood and gathered the folder under his arm, and at the tent flap he stopped. "The file's going to get corrected. I'll see to it myself." And then, because he was honest enough for it, "I came up here to find out who exaggerated. Nobody did. That's the part I'll be a while getting over." The nights after were the hard ones, and one of them Dana spent in the back of the cold hangar with Petra Voss, the 2 of them the only ones still up, a single work light throwing their shadows up the steel ribs. Petra had a survivor's insomnia, and Dana had the other kind, and neither of them had said so out loud. They'd just both ended up there at 2 in the morning with coffee going cold. "You keep flexing your hand," Petra said after a long quiet. "Right one, open, closed. You've done it about 40 times. Dana looked down at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. She hadn't known she was doing it. "Huh?" she said. "It's fine. I just noticed." They sat. The rain had stopped days ago, but the hangar still smelled of it. And Dana said the things she had not said to anyone, had not said to Banks or Grady or the review officer with his folder, the thing that sat under her breastbone since the 12th man came up on the hoist. I held that hover 90 extra seconds at the end, she said. Fully loaded, everybody aboard. I held it in the rounds because I needed the wind to gust right before I flew 12 men into that saddle. And the whole 90 seconds there was a part of me that was completely calm about it. That was just counting the wind, and there was another part of me standing off to the side watching the calm part, going, that's 12 people. If you're wrong about the wind, you kill 12 people who already lived through the worst night of their lives, and you'll do it steady. You won't even feel your hands shake because your hands don't shake when it counts. They shake after. She turned the coffee cup around in her fingers. I don't know what to do with a thing that can do that. Be that calm, holding that many lives on a guess. It doesn't feel like courage from the inside. It feels like something's missing where the fear's supposed to go. Petra was quiet a while. When she spoke, she didn't reach for comfort. She reached for the truth, which was better. Nothing's missing, Petra said. I watched you the whole way home. You were steady over the gun, and you were steady in the saddle, and then Ferris grabbed your harness and asked if he was going to make it, and I saw your face when you told him about the surgeon. That wasn't a person with a hole where the fear goes. The fear didn't leave, Dana. You just made it wait its turn. You put it behind the flying because the flying had to happen first, and then it came and collected. I heard about your hands on the pad after. Everybody heard. Salt won't shut up about it. The calm isn't instead of the fear. It's you holding the door on it till the work's done. She shrugged. That's the whole job. That's every good one of you I ever flew with. You just never got to see one from the inside before, so you thought it was only you, and you thought it was broken. Dana didn't say anything for a while. Her hand had stopped flexing. Huh, she said again, but different this time, and Petra let it be. The call she owed she made 3 days after that, and she made it because of what Prentice had said, and what Petra had said, and mostly because she was tired of being the kind of person who could fly a saddle in the dark and couldn't dial a phone. Nobody handed her anything. Nobody from Kansas turned up by coincidence with news of Wes Kettner. There was no letter, no chance meeting, no perfect stranger. There was just Dana sitting on an ammo can outside the hangar in the last light, with a name and number that had sat in her phone for 2 years, finally doing the thing that took 4 minutes. Wes picked up on the third ring, wary at an unknown number, and when she said who it was, there was a silence long enough that she thought he'd hang up. Mercer, he said finally. Well, been a minute. 2 years. She made herself keep going. I said a thing to you the day you washed out. In front of people. About some people not having the hands. I've owed you a phone call since about 10 minutes after I said it, and I've been a coward about making it for 2 years. And that's on me, not on you, and I'm sorry. It was cruel and it wasn't even true. You had the hands. You had a bad check ride. Those aren't the same, and I knew it when I said it, and I said it anyway because I was relieved it was you and not me. Another silence. When Wes spoke, there was something rueful in it, something that had done its own long work over 2 years. You know what? I'll tell you the truth. I quit flying after that. Went home, told myself I was done, that the Army had told me what I was. A breath. Then about a year ago, a buddy talked me into a little Cessna out of a grass strip, and I got back in it, and I remembered I actually love it, and I've been flying ever since. Ag work, some of it, funny enough. Dusting. Turns out I got the hands for that just fine. A pause. I'm not going to sit here and say it didn't hurt for 2 years, because it did. But I'm flying, and I'm happy, and your phone call didn't have to fix anything, because I already fixed it. Took me long enough. But I'll take the sorry. Thank you for the sorry. I'm glad you're flying, Dana said, and meant it all the way down. Yeah, me too. Hey, I heard something came through your unit lately. Something big. That you? It was a Thursday, Dana said, and Wes laughed, and it was easy after that. 2 pilots talking about aircraft, and when she hung up, she sat on the ammo can in the dark for a while, feeling 4 minutes lighter than she'd felt in 2 years. The reckoning with Rourke came in its own time, and it came after he'd already paid something for it. Word had gotten around, the way it does, and a couple of the younger pilots had started making noise about Rourke, about the bus driver crack, wanting to make him wear it. It would have been easy for Rourke to let that happen quietly, to let Dana take the win and himself take the muttering and never have to stand in front of her. Instead, 3 nights after the operation, at a full pilot's briefing with Banks present and everyone watching, Rourke stood up before anyone raised the subject and said to the room that he'd called Warrant Officer Mercer a ferry pilot who flew scared, that he'd said it loud and more than once where it could do damage, and that he'd listened to her fly an operation he wasn't sure he could have flown, and that anybody in the room still repeating his old line about her was repeating a coward's assessment made by a man who hadn't done his homework. He said it flat, and he didn't dress it up, and it cost him in front of every pilot he'd ever tried to impress. Then he sat down. He found her after, alone, by the aircraft. He stood there a moment, this big, loud, gifted man, and when he started the apology, it came out wrong, and he had to start it over. The thing is, I've spent... He stopped, started again. I've spent 15 years being the best pilot in every room I walked into, and I got so I could tell at a glance who wasn't a threat to that. And I looked at you and your file, and I filed you as no threat, and I was loud about it because being loud about it made me feel... He stopped again. His jaw worked. That's not an apology. That's an excuse with a coat on. Let me just say the thing. I was wrong about you in a way that could have cost you, and I was cruel about it on purpose. And I'm sorry. That's it. That's the whole thing. Dana looked at him for a moment. She could have made him bleed for it, and he'd have taken it. She could have given it away cheap and let them both off. She did neither. You flew it in your head, she said. The whole op. I could tell, listening, you were flying every second of it in your head with me. It wasn't quite absolution, and it wasn't punishment. It was recognition, one pilot to another, and it landed on Rourke harder than either of the other things would have, because it was true, and because it meant she'd known he was good the whole time he'd been trying to convince the room she wasn't. He nodded once and didn't try to say anything else, which was the smartest thing he did all week. The letter from Marta Ferris came 10 days later, forwarded up through channels. A real letter on real paper in a hand that pressed hard on the page. It had no military words in it anywhere. It said that she and Cole had spent their first night in the new house last weekend, that they'd slept on a mattress on the floor of an empty living room because the furniture hadn't come yet, and they hadn't wanted to wait any longer, that Cole's leg was healing and he could get up the stairs now, and that she didn't know how to thank a person for a whole life, for all the ordinary days that were going to happen now, the arguments about paint colors and the mornings with coffee and the growing old, all of it, every plain, enormous day of it, because a stranger flew a helicopter through a mountain in the dark. She wrote that she'd named the person in her prayers now, that she said Dana's name at night the way you say the name of someone you owe your whole world to, and that she hoped that wasn't strange. Dana read it twice and then didn't know what to do with her face or her hands. She had a fact for a dying man on a helicopter floor, and she'd had a level voice for a review officer and a fair word for the man who'd wronged her, and she had absolutely nothing for a woman on a mattress on the floor of an empty house, thanking her for the rest of her life. She folded the letter carefully along its hard-pressed creases and put it in the chest pocket of her flight suit over the left side, and she left it there. And she did not have words, and that was all right. Some things you're not supposed to have words for. Banks called her in and made it official and made it plain. He didn't hide behind the passive voice. I looked at the top line of your file and I decided who you were, and I put you in the ferry pool where I thought you belonged, he said. I was wrong in a way that nearly cost 12 men their lives. Because if you'd been off flying a training rotation somewhere that night instead of standing on my flight line, I don't have anybody who flies that saddle, and I lose all 12. My mistake almost killed people. I want you flying the hardest missions this unit gets, and I've already put your name at the top of the list, and I've written up what happened so that the next person who reads your file reads the right first line. He stood and put out his hand. I'm sorry it took me nearly getting a recon element killed to read past page 1. Grady found her last, the warrant officer who'd gone quiet the first morning watching her walk an aircraft, who'd given her the good birds and the crucial number, who had never in 3 weeks said one word more than he had to. He came across the yard while she was doing a walk-around in the late sun, running her palm along the aircraft's skin the way she always did, and he stood and watched her do it for a minute, and then he said the plainest true thing anybody said in the whole business. "I couldn't have told you that first morning what it was I saw," Grady said. "You walked that bird like you already knew it. I've watched 1,000 pilots pre-flight, and most of them are reading a checklist. You were listening to the aircraft." He nodded slowly, working it out even now. "I know what it was now. You don't fly the machine. You fly the air, and the machine's just the part of the air you're sitting in. I've been turning wrenches 30 years, and I never once thought of it like that till I watched you do it." He looked at her. "That recon element's home because you can hear a thing the rest of us can't. That's the whole of it. That's all I got." It was enough. It was more than enough. 14 months later, the season had turned dry, and the same country that had been soup was bone-colored dust, and Dana Mercer walked out onto a flight line at a different post in the last light of a long day, and the story had gone on the way stories do, spreading out into other lives. Petra Voss was a flight surgeon's right hand now, up at a trauma section on the coast, and she'd written that she still couldn't sleep past 3, but she'd stopped fighting it and started reading medicine in the quiet hours and had gotten frighteningly good, and that she thought about that night in the hangar more than she thought Dana knew. The night somebody finally told her the fear waiting its turn wasn't the same as being broken. Diego Salt had made crew chief on his own aircraft and had a habit now of telling every new medic who rotated through about the night the ferry pilot dropped a wall of air on a machine gun, and the story had gotten no less true and only a little taller in the telling. Cole Ferris had sent a photograph, no words on the back, just a photograph. A small house with a light on in every window and a porch and 2 camp chairs on the porch, and Marta beside him and Cole with a cane he clearly didn't need much anymore, standing on the steps of the place they'd waited to sleep in. The empty house full now, lamps in the windows, lived in, landed. Dana kept it in the same pocket as the letter over the left side, and the thing the night had left in her was still there, and it showed itself now the way it always did, quiet, at the edge of things. Because Dana Mercer no longer flew over anything she could fly under. Anybody who crewed with her noticed it eventually. She'd take an aircraft down into a valley she could have crossed on top of, get under the ridgeline, ride the low, smooth air where before that night she'd have gone high and easy over the top. It wasn't fear of altitude. It was something the saddle had taught her hands in the dark, a thing about trusting the shape of the air more than the safe, empty height above it. And it would have looked to anybody who didn't know like a strange preference, a pilot who liked the terrain a little too close. She never explained it. She just flew low now, the way her grandfather had, down where the air had decided what it was doing, and she was better down there than she had ever been up high, and she left it at that. A young pilot walking out beside her that evening, new, still reading checklists instead of listening to aircraft, watched Dana run her palm down the fuselage and asked her a question about the coming flight, some ordinary thing, and Dana answered it and then said the one thing she believed all the way down, said it easy, the way you say a thing you've earned the right to say. "The air's got a shape," she told him. "It's not flat, and it's not empty. You learn the shape of a piece of air, you can put an aircraft through a keyhole. Fight the shape, it'll kill you and never work up a sweat." She smiled a little, mostly to herself. "Somebody taught me that low over a bean field. Took me a while to believe him." She lifted off the dusty line into a clear evening, and she took the aircraft down into the country instead of over it, down into the folds and the low, smooth places, level-eyed and easy in the seat, reading the shape of the air the way some people read a language they were born into. The rotor threw a little dust up off the ground behind her and let it fall. Below her the terrain unrolled, close and known, and she flew it the way she'd been taught before she had words for it, low and unhurried and completely at home, going wherever the shape of the air would let her go, which was anywhere she needed to be.